All right. This is the article about SNP MP Margaret Ferrier. I want to just go over this again. She lives in Scotland, naturally, and she has the right to sit in Parliament in London. Frankly, that's another matter. I think that's wrong. That's my personal opinion. Seeing that she comes from Scotland, she will be able to claim an allowance at my expense, taxpayers' expense, for a house or some sort of a dwelling anyway in the London area so she can attend Parliament. So she is being generously treated by the British people generally for her representation in Scotland. One day, not feeling too well and suspecting that she might have the sickness that shall not be named, she got on the train heading to London. That's so she could attend parliamentary meetings on Monday. But of course, being socially responsible, she took a COVID test first. Then, knowing she was ill, suspecting it might be COVID, having taken a test but not having had the results, she then got on the train and then on the Monday attended Parliament, making a speech. And then on Monday night she got the results. And they were positive. She did indeed have COVID. And so, now what she did up to then was, it wasn't a good thing, but slightly understandable for somebody who has a diminished sense of responsibility. But at that point, you know you have COVID, what do? You go to your flat in London and you stay there. Miss Ferrier didn't do that. What she did was, knowing she had COVID, she got back on the train and went back to Scotland. Now, let's go through this in slow motion. I looked up how many people travel on trains between London and Edinburgh, for instance. I couldn't find that, but I did find this statement from Virgin. Nearly 2,000, Virgin is a train company around here, Richard Branson's company. Nearly 2,000 people travel between Glasgow and London every day by Virgin trains, it says. So that's 2,000 people between Glasgow and London. So I don't know how many trips the train makes, but I'm assuming 4, one there in the morning, one back, and then one there in the afternoon, one back. There's something like that. There's 2,000 people, that's 500 people on the train, and that's 500 people that she could, up to 500 people on the train that she could have infected. And that is not counting the people she would have bumped into in the crowded concourses. Let's say she went from Edinburgh to King's Cross. Well, here's a photograph of Edinburgh Waverley, and here's a photograph of King's Cross in London. So that's what she did on her way there, and that's what she did on her way back. And this is not to count the travelling from the station to the Houses of Parliament, because King's Cross is not that near the Houses of Parliament, and you have to change trains. If you're going in the underground, then what you have to do is you come out of King's Cross, or you go to another section of it, you get, I think it's the Piccadilly line, and then you have to get out Green Park, I suppose, something like that, and then change to the Westminster line, and then go to the Houses of Parliament. And in between, and those trains are always packed, and in between the concourses are, like tunnels, and there are lots of people walking up and down there, and she could have bumped into, in the course of one journey, she could have passed 2,000 people, what with the trains and the connections. Now, of course, she might have got a taxi from King's Cross to Westminster, in which case the taxi driver would have been in trouble, and anyone who sat in the taxi after she'd got out of it. So this woman, and she knew what she was doing. So here is the article in The Guardian. An SNP MP has been suspended from a party and faced multiple calls to resign after taking a train from London to Scotland, knowing she had tested positive for COVID-19. And it says here, on Saturday she began suffering symptoms of the virus. Just a minute. She took a test. Then she travelled 400 miles to London. Remember, people coming and going on the train. Oh, I want to point out, for those of you who aren't familiar with English trains, might think that they're still like the old-fashioned things where you've got coaches with separated sections in them. No, they're like buses now. So when you're walking down the train, you're walking past all the people who are sitting in the seats on either side, and touching the tops, like in an aeroplane, touching the tops of the chairs as you go past. And then, of course, other people sit, you cough, all sorts of things happening there. And you hand your ticket to the ticket inspectors. Yeah. And this was on Saturday. And then she made a brief speech during a debate on coronavirus. So she said a few words. She did this to say a few words in Parliament, her 5 minutes in the sun. That evening, this is Monday evening, she was told she'd tested positive. It's unclear whether she was told that before or after she spoke in Parliament. I suspect it was after, if it was the afternoon. The following morning, Tuesday, so she stayed overnight in London, which means she went from the Houses of Parliament to, well, probably her flat. And then instead of staying there, she travelled by train to Scotland, knowing she had the virus. The Guardian understands that Ferrier told the SNP's chief whip, Patrick Grady, that a family member was unwell and was given the requisite permission to leave Parliament. So she lied. She said, I can't turn up at the Scottish Parliament because there's a family member unwell. Yeah? So she wasn't prepared to infect the Scottish Parliament, but she went through England in a train infecting English people, and then she went to the Houses of Parliament to infect them. And you will never convince me that that wasn't at the back of her mind. On Wednesday afternoon, she told Grady that she tested positive for coronavirus herself, but it was assumed, she didn't tell him when she got the result, and so Patrick Grady, thought that this had happened, that the results had come through when she got back to Scotland. Now, it says here, the mood within the SNP Westminster group was described as one of disbelief and fury on Thursday, and that they've removed the party whip. Oh, here's I'm going to take another shot of this page. Here's a nice picture of of how she travelled. But there's, you see, they haven't talked about the people she met in London. Now, Sturgeon says this is utterly indefensible. She went from Glasgow, not from Edinburgh by the looks of things, according to this map anyway. Anyway, the Train Drivers Union described her actions as dangerous and disgraceful, and the Commons authorities, they said there are people and they had to do a deep clean of Parliament. Ferrier said, I was wrong, I'm very sorry for my mistake. No, it wasn't a mistake. It was like the Chinese sending tourists from Wuhan to America and other parts of the world when they knew they had a problem in Wuhan. That wasn't a mistake, and neither was this. I deeply regret my actions. I'll bet she does. Look, I want to talk about the SNP because she is part of the SNP, and her attitudes come from the way the SNP have behaved all the time. When the SNP got their seats in Parliament, Dennis Skinner. I'll tell you how they acted in their first days in the English Parliament. There's a Labour MP called Dennis Skinner who was called the father of the House because he was the oldest MP, and he's been in Parliament like forever. I can't remember a time when he wasn't. Let's see how old he is now. He served until 2019 and he's 88 now. So he was 87 when the SNP took over some of the seats in Parliament. Now, Dennis Skinner had been sitting on the same part of the same bench for the past 30 years, ever since he became an MP. When the SNP came in, they acted rowdily. They didn't observe the usual niceties of ceremonies, and they sat down on one bench, displacing Dennis Skinner. Now, I know it sounds petty, but this man was an elderly man, a much respected, I didn't like his politics, but he was a respected politician who had worked for his constituency consistently. As I say, I very much disagreed with him, but there's no doubt that he's an honourable politician, and I know that sounds like an oxymoron. They just shoved him out of the way. I mean, even if he was just an ordinary old man on a bus, they shouldn't have done that. But they felt, right, we're going to show the English Parliament we can do what we want. And that's exactly the same attitude that Margaret Ferrier was displaying. I don't care if I've got COVID, I'm going to give it to all of those Sassenachs there in London. And that's what's wrong with that. It's all very well for Nicola Sturgeon to be saying, well, I'm very shocked and I'm disgusted by her behaviour. Well, that's what they may say. But the attitude that caused this to happen is an attitude fostered by Sturgeon herself. And that's why it happened. It happened because they're a bunch of undisciplined, nationalistic, semi-fascist rabble, basically, and they've somehow got their hooks into the British Parliament. And they're a disgrace.
Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.